Hello, everyone. Welcome to our Create an SBC Inventor Series webinar. I'm Yulia Stream, Global Strategic Marketing, and I'll facilitate today's session. We are excited to talk about our recently launched technology, Nexar. After a brief introduction, we'll dive into the key requirements for protective eyewear for healthcare industry, followed by the overview of our Nexar solutions to enhance anti-fog performance. The last 20 minutes of the event will be dedicated to address your questions. Please use questions tab in the bottom right of your screen to submit the questions. And this webinar is being recorded, so you'll get a replay link shortly after the event. It's my pleasure to introduce Jim Smith, our Nexar expert. Jim leads the strategic initiatives at Kraton and has over 30 years of rich industry experience with multiple different business and operations roles at Shell and Kraton. Kraton is the inventor of styrenic block copolymers and a global leading producer of specialty chemicals. Sustainability is critical to our business, and this is the third year we've received Platinum Sustainability rating from EcoVadis. We're also part of the Together for Sustainability industry initiative, as well as the several plastics recycling associations. Headquartered in Houston, Texas, Kraton has a global manufacturing and operations footprint, enabling us to deliver sustainable solutions globally. Our commitment to innovation and broad portfolio solutions helps support customers across a wide range of end-use markets. And without further ado, I'll hand over to Jim to talk about our solutions for anti-fog performance.
Thank you, Yulia, for the wonderful introduction. And let me just once again welcome everybody who's chosen to be here with us today. I know you guys have lots of different choices on how to invest your time, and I'm very honored that you've chosen to spend time with us today to kind of hear about some groundbreaking technology in the area of fog prevention. And I know people are joining from different time zones. For those who are joining from Asia, I know it's really late your time, so I'm especially grateful that you guys are still up at 11 o'clock or midnight and willing to spend some time with us. And I think I have a really great story to share with you today. It's one that I personally believe has the ability to significantly impact the safety and health of our frontline healthcare workers. And I think you're probably going to pick this up as you listen to me today, but that's an area that I'm personally very passionate about. So I have a deep respect and gratitude for people in our healthcare industry. My wife has spent her entire career working in healthcare. So I know firsthand how stressful that can be taking care of acutely sick people. And I also know from firsthand experience how continuously bombarded by viruses and bacteria people are who are spending their time taking care of sick people. And not only do they risk their own health, but they're bringing those things back home potentially to their family. um, and so from that standpoint, I'm personally very driven to provide proper protective equipment for our healthcare industry. And fortunately, I'm not alone in that respect. So you can see that most of the major government regulatory agencies around the world also are very engaged and involved in trying to understand how they can best protect healthcare workers and offering guidance and advice in that regard. And in the last few years, we just went through this COVID pandemic, and that really, I think, brought to light the need for personal protective equipment in healthcare and how to protect people from getting highly contagious diseases like COVID, which are spread by airborne, primarily airborne. And that was something I think that we saw the CDC, or the Center for Disease Control, weigh in on. The World Health Organization weighed in on it. OSHA, and in all these cases, they were saying eye protection is absolutely essential if you're working on anybody that's even suspected of having COVID, because you have to prevent any kind of respiratory droplets from coughing, any kind of blood splashes, any kind of respiratory issues at all, or droplets from touching the mucosal membranes of your face. And I think for all you individuals who actually have been involved in going out in public over the last few years when we had COVID, we all had to wear a mask. And no matter where we went, if we went to the grocery store, we had to wear a mask. And so I don't think it's any surprise that you see here that the WHO, OSHA, CDC, others were recommending that healthcare workers not only wear a mask, but they also wear a face shield and they wear gloves. And that became, I think, really important for any kind of, not just COVID, but for any kind of airborne pathogen. So it could be influenza, common ones like mumps, measles, chickenpox, Ebola, MRSA, staph, anything that's airborne. And it wasn't just these organizations. This was a sampling. I mean, the Food and Drug Administration, the FDA, said, hey, it's absolutely critical to wear face protection or eye protection to prevent body fluids, blood splashes, or respiratory droplets from reaching the mucosal membranes of the face, nose, or mouth. NIOSH, National Institute of Occupational Safety and Health, basically said the same thing. And so, I think COVID really brought that to light because there was really, probably not a lot of attention given to PPE in many respects until COVID hit. And it was such a national pandemic or global pandemic that people really started paying attention to it. And the other thing too, I would just say, is that even though we kind of feel COVID is behind us, I was just in Quebec City last year and it kind of felt like normal and traveling in planes. There's been more than 100 variants of that identified and described. And, you guys are familiar with a lot of those like Omicron and Alpha and Beta and the current one, EG5, that's out today. So I think, we have to remain vigilant in, managing and helping our healthcare workers with protective equipment. So, ultimately, I think at this point, it's very obvious that everybody is saying eye protection is critical. So the question then becomes, are people actually doing it? So are we seeing people comply with a lot of these regulatory mandates? And so for the answer to that, we actually went to the International Safety Center, the IFC, who has a research group called EpiNet Research. And they've been collecting healthcare worker exposure data from hospitals around the country since 1992, so for more than 30 years now. And what we found is that we wanted to take a couple years where we thought, hey, people, if they're going to wear protective equipment, they're for sure going to wear it during the COVID pandemic. And because there you've got a highly infectious disease killing millions of people. So, if people are going to take precautions, it's going to be when they're most at risk. And so we took 2 years. We took 2020, 2021 as benchmark years. And we said, okay, let's go look at the data and see what the reported exposures look like. And so you can see here a couple interesting data points. One is that the majority of healthcare worker exposure occurred to the face and head area, over 80% of it. And out of the exposure to the face and head, the majority of that actually occurred to the eyes. So the eye mucosal membranes, which was over 70%. So we said, hey, we see we have a fairly significant issue with eye exposure. And we started digging a bit deeper into the data to understand, why that was. And a couple interesting points emerged here, which I think you can see. One is that 90% of the people that reported eye exposure issues were not wearing any kind of protective equipment, and that really stunned us because we thought this is when people for sure would have been wearing that, especially since the World Health Organization, the CDC, were saying you need to do that. And the other thing that we thought was really interesting is a lot of that exposure actually occurred in patient rooms. So the majority of the exposure was occurring just in common kind of interactions with patients in the patient room. And then if you throw in emergency room and surgery, almost 3/4 of all the exposure cases occurred in those areas. So at this point, if you're like us, you're probably sitting here thinking, hey, we just talked about all these regulatory bodies who said it's absolutely critical to wear face protection or face shields, especially when you're working with COVID patients. And now we see many, many cases where people aren't doing that. And so the question becomes, why is that? So if people aren't doing it when they're most at risk, what's the problem? And so that actually turned out to be a relatively easy answer to find, because when we started digging into that, there are many, many reports out there that basically point out fogging as the single biggest reason why people are either removing their protective face shields or they're not actually using them to start with. And so I think if you know any of you wear glasses and you had a face mask on, which I'm sure you did during the COVID pandemic, you know firsthand how easy it is to fog your glasses because your breath is coming up from the face mask. And so, I had many, many issues with fogging during that. And that's the same issue that healthcare workers are having, because they're being told to wear a mask and they're also being told to wear a face shield or protective eye goggles. And as part of that, the breath is coming up and it's causing fogging to the point they literally are having difficulty seeing. So they either just don't wear it at all or they're taking it off. In COVID, I think that this has been a problem probably for many decades, but COVID really brought it to light because it was trying to drive mandated compliance with protective eyewear. And that's why you see so many reports and studies that came out saying fogging is just a huge issue during the COVID pandemic. So there was an article from the American Journal of Infection Control that was very large. So they studied over 1,600 healthcare workers, and over 80% of those healthcare workers said fogging was a significant problem or issue in them using protective face wear or eyewear in the performance of their job. And then there was another big study in the National Library of Medicine. Again, similar results. Said over 70% of the people were saying fogging was actually impeding their ability to provide quality health care. We looked at a Mass General study in the British Medical Journal, and it said people that were wearing protective face shields with fogging issues were touching their face nearly twice as much as people that weren't wearing a face shield. And you guys know that anytime you're working with a patient and you're touching your face, that's a huge source of potential contamination. And so that was very concerning. There was a big, it's not just the US issue, obviously. There was a big Canadian study that said the same thing. Over 70% of the people in that study in Canada said that, fogging was preventing them from providing quality health care. It was the biggest issue they had. And very recent articles. So there was a recent article that came out in the Journal of Emergency Nursing, and this was based on Chinese experience in dealing with COVID patients in China. And there they said that fogging was significantly impeding the efficiency of the workforce, in some cases to the point that it was impeding just simple things like drawing blood and even causing patient injury. And in India, another article, I think it just came out earlier this year in 2023. It was in the Indian Journal of Critical Care, and it was about the experience in India of caring for, COVID-related patients. And they said it was hindering the ability to provide life-saving procedures. It was also causing significant worker efficiency issues. And the list could go on and on. I mean, we have many, many different studies that was showing fogging is clearly the number one issue that was driving, you know, problems. And the bottom line, ultimately, to simplify it, really came down to where if a healthcare worker had to make a choice between providing, quality healthcare and in protecting their own health or safety in terms of potential contamination, they were picking and selecting quality healthcare, so serving others. So I want to move into a discussion now around, hey, there's mandated compliance that people should be wearing protective eyewear. We know that there's many cases where they're not doing it, and we just talked about why they're not doing it. So before we talk about solutions, though, we actually like to get your input on, your own experiences with protective eyewear and, what you think is important in that regard. So we have a little poll question, which you should see pop up on your screen now. And if you can provide input on that, we'll have Yulia capture that, and she can come back in the chat and share the results with us. So I'm going to pause here for a minute and give you time, a few seconds to go through and do that. Yulia, I'll ask you to let me know when everybody is actually completed with that. And maybe I can't see the chat, so maybe you can just give me the quick results as well.
It looks like we've got all the answers. Does not fog quickly definitely is the leading one, and followed by comfort and fit.
Okay. That's not surprising at all. That's kind of consistent with what we've seen in the healthcare industry. And both of those two are in fact, in the studies we looked at, both of those two were the two leading indicators in the healthcare industry as well. So let's talk about, we know what the root cause was and the problem. So, what is the solution? So what can be done to change the game here? And so logically, I think we all know what the solution is. The solution is to wear a face mask in combination with a face shield or face goggles to protect the eyes and the mucosal membranes, um, and is non-fogging, so people actually keep them on their heads instead of in their hands. Um, and we have studies actually done in terms of, or that's been completed in National Library of Medicine, for example, that show if people are doing what you see in the picture here, wearing a face mask in combination with a face shield, it's blocking over 97% of the droplets or particles that could potentially contaminate the mucosal membranes of the face. And so the answer was relatively obvious. The problem became, you know, if there's solutions out there, why aren't people using them? So we actually spent time and looked at what's available in the market, because we thought surely somebody out there is providing some kind of solution for this problem that seems to be, widespread, almost epidemic throughout the healthcare industry. So we took all the leading brands supplying, face shields and protective goggles, protective eyewear into the healthcare market. So all the leading medical distributors like, McKesson, Medline, Owens and Minor. We took a lot of the big branded OEMs, you know, making anti-fog film like 3M and DuPont and many others. And we pulled their information. So we pulled the products, we pulled the performance specs, the data sheets. And interestingly, we couldn't find anybody anywhere that actually specified any performance data around an anti-fog claim. So they may say, hey, it contains an anti-fog coating, but there were no performance data, there were no test specs, there was nothing that indicated how well it performed. And we saw from people out there in the industry saying, hey, we're struggling trying to find anything that actually works. And so, there was a Mass General article I mentioned, I think earlier, that came out in the British Medical Journal that said, in their view, there really didn't appear to be any gold standard in the market to solve this particular problem. And the other thing that we found as we were starting to dig into the solution space is that a lot of the existing solutions out there, especially the solutions that were based on hydrophilic, or not hydrophilic, but hydrophobic chemistry, especially like wipes and sprays, were based on PFAS chemistry, so fluoride-based chemistry, that is considered forever chemicals now. So, Europe is almost always leading a lot of the regulatory thrust around, toxic or hazardous chemicals, and they are again with respect to PFAS. But in the US EPA just recently came out and said they're also looking at classifying PFAS chemistry as hazardous under CIRCULA. So, we've known for some period of time that fluoride-based chemistry like this is not only non-recyclable, it just hangs around forever once you actually make it and use it, but it also has been implicated in immune system suppression, It's been implicated in cancer. It's been implicated in thyroid disease and a number of other things. And that's why the EPA is looking at classifying this as hazardous chemistry. And so we said, now you got an issue where you've got existing solutions that don't appear to be adequate. You've got existing solutions that appear to be using toxic chemistry that's about to be deemed hazardous by the EPA. And same thing is happening in Europe. We get people from all over the world asking us for PFAS alternatives now. So we really need, what we need is an environmentally friendly, human friendly, non-toxic anti-fog solution that actually works. And so that really brings me kind of to the heart of the story that we wanted to share with you. And that's this very unique technology that we've actually developed in Kraton. So we've developed this unique 5-block or pentablock polymer. In the mid block is it's really an amphiphilic polymer technology. And by amphiphilic polymer technology, I mean it has a combination of both hydrophilic chemistry and hydrophobic chemistry. And if you're familiar at all with the anti-fog space, you know that most of the solutions in anti-fog are either one or the other. So they're either hydrophobic, meaning that they beat up and repel moisture droplets or water droplets, like the Rain-X, for example, that you would put on a car windshield. Or they're hydrophilic, meaning they absorb and disperse the moisture evenly throughout the coating, such that it doesn't impede light transmittance. We've actually combined the best of both worlds in this unique 5-block polymer. So the mid block is very hydrophilic and absorbs instantly moisture or water. And then we have the hydrophobic blocks on both ends, which are providing the flexibility of a rubber block right here shown in green, and the strength and cohesion of the styrene blocks shown in blue here on the end. So we have something that not only performs extremely well, and I'll talk more about that in just a second, in terms of moisture absorption and fog prevention, but actually has great flexibility and great strength and great cohesion to various substrates. So the secret to the technology is really these nanochannels that get formed. And the chemistry is relatively complex, but we can actually condition the formation of these nanochannels. In other words, we can control the morphology of these nanochannels in a way that maximizes water absorption. And the other thing that's really unique as part of what we've done here and been able to do in terms of these nanochannel chemistry is this material can absorb way over 200% its weight in water. So, and to give you a comparison, to put that meaning behind that, polyvinyl alcohol is another common technology used in anti-fog, and it can absorb only 42% or less of its weight in water. Cellulose diacetate, which is another common technology used in this space, is even lower than that. So we've designed a technology that's absorbing 5-6 times or more the amount of water or moisture intrusion on the surface than other common in the market. And you can see here that the coating is in green, and it's just on top of the film substrate that's for the protective goggles. And so the other thing that I want to note here is just the fact that when the water is absorbed, it has a massive capacity, obviously, to absorb moisture from that's condensing quickly. But it also has this reverse gradient kind of play. So as soon as the instant of moisture absorption dissipates and it becomes higher loading in the film substrate, it actually slowly evaporates it back out. So you never see, it's preparing to reabsorb, and you never see the incident where that actually forms fog on the top of the face shield. So the thing that may be thinking about here, and before I skip ahead, let me just say what we did is we said, hey, we think we've got a technology that's not just marginally superior to anything else in the market. We think it's significantly superior to anything else in the market. But the only way to actually understand that and determine that is to go out and do an apples to apples test, right? We want to take our technology and we want to test it head to head. We called it the Pepsi Challenge against everybody out there that's currently in the space in all the leading brands and just see how we actually stack up. So that brings me to what I want to talk to you about next, because it became very interesting. We said, hey, we want to go to an independent lab. We want to do performance testing and test this Nexar anti-fog solution versus everything else we can find in the market, especially from all the leading brands that are currently in the healthcare space. And we ran into a problem because we couldn't find any performance specifications for protective eyewear into the healthcare space. None. And no testing methodology. And so that probably explains why we didn't see any specifications in any of the product listings that we actually reviewed when we were looking at a lot of the other leading brands out there on the market. There weren't any. And so we said, okay, well, let's go find anti-fog product specifications elsewhere. Let's look at safety glasses, because almost everybody in the world, anybody in manufacturing, anybody in operations, anybody in the US anyway, under OSHA requirements, have to wear safety glasses as part, I mean, it's mandated compliance as part of much of the work that you're doing in an operational setting. And so we went to safety glasses, and believe it or not, there wasn't even anti-fog specifications on safety glasses until 2020. And that was a huge issue because, I mean, fundamentally, eye injuries, according to occupational health and safety, eye injuries were actually, or the number one cause of not wearing protective eyewear, safety glasses, was fogging. And people were either taking their safety glasses off because of fogging, or they weren't wearing them to start with. And the Department of Labor, the U.S. Department of Labor, Bureau of Labor, said that eye injuries, because people weren't wearing the safety glasses, was costing employers more than $460 million a year in direct costs. And so that's just the health benefits and insurance going out because of the eye injury. And then NIOSH, which I mentioned earlier, National Institute of Occupational Safety and Health, came in and said, hey, that's understated, because if you factor in all the indirect cost of eye injuries in the workplace, it's much closer to $1 billion. So it's well over $900 million when you factor in the legal fees, the cost of going out and rehiring employees, et cetera. So finally, in 2020, the International Safety Equipment Association, so ISEA, came in and developed an ANSI spec for safety glasses. So this is the ANSI Z87 spec here in 2020 that you actually see. And basically, it said, hey, if you're going to make a claim that safety glasses are anti-fog, then they're going to go through a very specific testing criteria in a humidity chamber under very specific conditions. And they have to demonstrate that they don't fog for at least 8 seconds minimum. And that meant that they had to at least maintain light transmittance above 80% for that 8 seconds. So that was a criteria, being above 80% light transmittance, that, was shown as not fogging. And they also said, hey, not only does it have to have a very definitive time that it doesn't fog, but it also needs to show it also needs to be optically clear. And so they looked at, light distortion through the material as well, and said it had to be less than 3% haze, which is kind of wide angle light scattering or distortion. And so that was the other criteria. And of course, it had to be non-skin irritating. There was a similar spec that we pulled in Europe, EN 166, which didn't really have a duration requirement around anti-fog, but it had a lot of the other things, and it said it had to be at least identify what was used in the testing procedure for the anti-fog. And we also, so in addition to what I just talked about here, we found an ASTM spec that was used for really high-end durable anti-fog eyewear in alpine sports. So in skiing and snowboarding, which is really a robust requirement because they're in very severe temperature conditions, right? Where you're going from, warm air to extremely cold air, and your breath is potentially fogging it as well. And so that ASTM standard was much more robust than this ANSI 8-second standard. The ASTM standard said, hey, you got to make it for 30 seconds in this test chamber without fogging in order to pass the ASTM standard. So we said, hey, we're going to test our material and all these competitor materials against ASTM standard as well. So I had to give you that background as to what we tested against. So the ANSI standard, the EM 166 standard, and we also tested against the ASTM standard. So now let me share the data with you. So what we found is, as I mentioned before, you basically needed to remain above this 80% light transmittance to pass the test. And for the ANSI, you had to be beyond the 8-second mark. And for ASTM, you had to be beyond the 30-second mark before you fell out of the screen zone, right? So down into the space where, you know, you're below the 80%. And so everything starts at 100% light transmittance at time 0. And then they start the humidification chamber. And you can see the top line here is our Nexar advanced solution. And so literally it went to the ANSI spec of 8 seconds, absolutely no loss in light transmittance. It went to the ASTM at 30 seconds, no loss in light transmittance, was still running out to double the ANSI spec at 60 seconds, 0 loss in light transmittance. You can see here's 9 different competitors we tested, and these were leading competitors on the market. So this is multiple different 3M anti-fog films, DuPont anti-fog films, you know, McKesson, Medline, O&M, and you can see I didn't. We left the names out to protect the innocent here, but I mean, none of them made it anywhere near even the minimum 8-second ANSI standard. In fact, at the point of the ANSI standard, most of these were down at 50% or less light transmittance, which kind of came back and collaborated what we were hearing in our own interviews with doctors and nurses in the space. And what I just shared with you earlier in terms of all those studies is there's no gold standard out there. There's a huge need for somebody to bring a product to market that actually works and prevents fog on face shields when people are actually trying to use it in critical medical procedures. And so I just will take a second here and kind of recap what I've shown you over the last 2 or 3 slides. So the current technology that's out there today doesn't even meet the minimum ANSI standard of 8 seconds. Also, much of it, especially the hydrophobic kind of technologies, are based on PFAS chemistry, which is, you know, being regulated out in many regions across the world because of the toxicity. And also, you know, the Duke University study, I may have mentioned that earlier. Duke University did a study of this PFAS chemistry and found that, you know, lots of it were thresholds above the toxic limits. And so not only was it bad chemistry, but it was actually above the toxic limits for fluoride-based compounds. The stuff that we had and we put in the test I just was showing you the graph of was actually well above 10 times longer to fog than the competitors, because it literally kept running out way beyond 60 seconds even. It exceeded the ANSI standard by many multiples, more than 8 times. And we felt, hey, if it's working, it's going to promote the face protection mandate compliance that we were talking about earlier. And the other key point I want to make here is it's eco-friendly. So I mean, we've tested, it has no aquatic toxicity associated with it that we know of in terms of killing fish or aquatic life. It has no human toxicity. It's a TSCA exempt polymer. So it has a great regulatory profile. It has a great environmental profile, and it actually works incredibly well. So at this point, if you're like us, you were sitting there thinking, hey, this technology looks great on paper. We actually tested it in independent labs, and it looks great in lab testing. But, quite frankly, real life is different. So if you took this technology out into a clinical setting in a hospital where people are wearing it for 2 hours at a time or 12-hour shifts at a time, does it really work? How is it going to work in a true, real clinical setting? And so I want to share with you the results of that, because we actually did that. We were very fortunate to work with Mass General Hospital, and Mass General Hospital is consistently rated as one of the top 3 hospitals in the entire world. In fact, this year in 2023, I just looked recently at the hospital ratings. In number 1 was Mayo Clinic in the U.S., number 2 was Cleveland Clinic, and number 3 was Mass General Clinic. And they probably have the number 1 medical academic institution in the world in Harvard Medical as well. And so Mass General, we talked to the innovation team there, the doctors there, and they said, hey, if you got something you think works for anti-fogging, we're desperate for a solution. We're more than willing to try it. We'll actually run a very sophisticated, blind, randomized trial, gold standard kind of trial, and test your solution versus our incumbent technology. And so they did that. And they published the results in the British Medical Journal, which you can see here on the screen, which is a peer-reviewed journal. So nothing gets into this journal unless it's been reviewed by your peers across the globe. And the comments that they made relative to our technology versus the incumbent, which was preferred by more than 2 to 1, was, it improved the healthcare workers' visualization, improved their experience. They believe it would lead to significantly reduced negative care impacts. And importantly, this was, our motto was get the face shields, get the protective eyewear out of people's hands onto their heads. And they said, hey, we think it's going to increase the eyewear mandate compliance. And really, really positive feedback. So we said, hey, not only does this stuff work in the lab, it actually has, clinical validation, not just anywhere, but in one of the top 3 hospitals in the world. And even within Mass General, they deployed this in probably the most severe circumstances you can possibly deploy it in, which was the emergency room medicine or emergency room setting. So this was about the most rigorous test we could think of that could be designed. And the other thing I would just note here is there was no other this comment that they made, and this was Dr. Chris Olson, who's VP of their innovation program at Mass General Brigham and also a professor at Harvard Med School. There was no other gold standard that they have seen or are aware of in personal protective equipment. So we really latched onto that because we said, hey, people that are actually using these products and making choices, whether they're purchasing organization buying protective eyewear for healthcare, or they're actually the doctors and nurses that are using them, need some kind of standard that they can actually go by and use to know what they're actually getting. Is it going to work? Is it not going to work? What are they paying for? And so we said, somebody needs to create a standard that's actually going to provide that kind of information. So we worked with our own technical group inside Kraton. We worked with, outside industry consultants, and we came up with an anti-fog performance rating system that, is just an unbiased industry rating system. Anybody can be rated against it, that actually provides critical information to end users and purchasers on what it is they're actually going to be buying. And you can see we broke it into two sets of criteria. And in my mind, if any of you out there have ever bought a diamond, you're buying a diamond on the basis usually of color and clarity. And you get those 2 ratings. That's kind of an industry standard that's used around the world. That's how I bought my engagement ring for my wife back many years ago. And this is kind of the same thing. So we basically said, here we actually have an anti-fog performance rating system that is based on time to fog. So we said, hey, if it doesn't meet the 8-second ANSI, it fails. It's a D. If it does meet ANSI, get the ASTM. If it meets the 30-second ASTM, then it's a B. And if it exceeds it by more than 2x, and we were X, A. And we did the same thing with optical clarity or haze. So this was around the light distortion piece of the ANSI spec. And we said if it's not less than 3%, it doesn't pass ANSI, it fails. 2.5 to 3, I mean, it's in the game. It's not great. It's a 3. 2 to 2.5 was kind of average, and if it's less than 2, that was ideal. So this is the kind of scale we think, hey, if we rate the protective eyewear out there as, an A1 or an A3 or a D4, whatever it may be, at least people can consciously make a choice in what it is they're spending their money on. And doctors and nurses actually know what they're getting to use. And so I want to take this system now, and I want to go back to the data I shared with you earlier and put that data in the context of this anti-fog performance rating system and share that with you. So you can see the Nexar Advanced, which is what I showed you on the graph. It ran out to well over 150 seconds without failing the fogging test. And again, that's a reflection of how much water and moisture we can absorb. Had very low haze, so well below the 2% ideal. And so it was an A1. In fact, it was the only thing we tested that actually met the A1 criteria. We also have kind of a mid-tier anti-fog solution, which is our standard grade, using the similar technology. It ran out to almost 2 times ASTM. Again, very low haze. It was a B1, so just slightly below our premium grade. And then we have a Nexar Essentials grade, which is our more economical grade. And it exceeded the ANSI spec by multiple times. And it ended up a C3. None of the other solutions we tested, so these are the major brand OEMs on the market, none of them passed the time to fog the ANSI even minimum standard. And so they were all rated a D. And in fact, most of them were rated anywhere from a 1 to 3, or even I think maybe one may have been a 4 in terms of that. So, you know, we had no competitors, even at least if it were my wife actually wearing a product where I would say, hey, I would recommend she use that. I mean, to me, if you're not at least meeting the ANSI standard, you shouldn't even be playing in the game. And so we put together just a kind of a summary table, if you will, here, showing our 3 Nexar solutions. So our advanced, which was the A1 rating I was just sharing with you on the scale, our kind of mid-tier, which was a B1, and our essential, which was a C3, versus industry average thing. And there's, you know, 2 things I really want to point out here. One is that we said none of our products are going to be made with PFAS forever chemistry. One is we don't believe in it. We think it's you know, got too many toxic issues. It's being regulated out. In fact, I think some of you may have heard 3M, who has a big, huge business in PFAS chemistry, is saying they're going to be out of it by 2025. That's a $1.5 billion business for them. And lots of the players in that space currently use that kind of technology. So that's one thing I want to point out. The other is we said, hey, any solution that we deliver has to meet the ANSI 8 seconds. So even our most economical grade is exceeding it by more than 2 times or double. And you know, if we don't even want to play if we can't meet minimum standards for healthcare workers. And so we at this point, you know, it's kind of like we're at the point where we said, you know, or people are asking, hey, you know, understand this is lab tested, you've got clinical validation. I can understand how it's actually comparing and rating against other technologies. You know, how do you actually sell it, or what do we buy? And so I want to give you kind of an overview of how we're going to market with this. So we actually have, there's 2 different paths. One is a liquid coating product. The other is actually selling the anti-fog film already made. And so we have the film products. We have 3 different grades. I mentioned to you before. We have the advanced, we have our standard, and we have our essential film grades. And those are in master rolls right now. So we can slit and rewind to pretty much any length or width that is desired by whoever is going to use it to actually make face shields. And I should point out here, I think this may have been obvious to me, but maybe not everyone else. We're not in the game of making face shields. We're a raw material supplier. So we will provide anti-fog film, as I'm mentioning right here, to people who want to make face shields. Or if people are making film and they want an anti-fog coating for their film, we'll sell them the actual liquid in solution to actually coat their own film with. And here you can see we offer 2 different versions of our anti-fog liquid. We have the advanced, and then we have the essential, or the kind of the more economical version. It comes standard in 30-gallon composite line drums. We can make smaller containers if people want them. And I would also note our film here, I think I didn't mention this earlier, we coated obviously as film substrate. In our case, we used a 7 mil PET, and we selected that very carefully because we wanted a substrate to coat our material on that had great optical properties. We wanted something that was flexible because you have to bend it around the face for a face shield, and we wanted something that was strong, not flimsy, and people didn't feel was sturdy. And so we looked at lots of different film solutions. The one that resonated with us, we thought had the best combination of strength, flexibility, clarity, was a 7 mil PET. And so that's what all of ours is coated on if you buy the film product. And we have samples available. So if you go to www.nexar-antifog.com, you can request film samples. We actually send you a brochure with sheets of all 3 of our film grades in there, and you can take those. You can test them yourself. You can use them. You can breathe on the side that's coated. You get absolutely no fogging. You can breathe on the other side, and you can see fogging instantly. So it's a great show and tell as well. So that's actually what we're selling, and I'll finish and leave you with this slide because I mean at this point we're very blessed. We feel very blessed. We feel very excited, and in some ways maybe even humbled to bring such a unique and differentiated technology to the market, especially to solve what's a real life, very critical need in the healthcare space. And we're looking for partners. We're looking for people who can take this technology that I just described to you and make anti-fog film with it, translate that into anti-fog, protective eyewear, and actually take it to market. And for me personally, I'm very passionate about the healthcare space. So there's this emotional benefit of being able to provide this service to our frontline, healthcare workers who I consider heroes. But I mean, there's also this very, very tangible financial benefit as well. So whoever can actually take such a unique product to market that's meeting a need that we can't find any other solution for has the ability to very significantly expand their market share and grow their revenue and margin. So I mean, I think there's a really significant potential financial reward involved here. So I think Yulia mentioned back at the beginning, we're going to leave time at the end for questions. And so I'm going to stop here. I'm going to let Yulia jump back on and kind of facilitate any of the questions you guys put in the chat or you have just live now, so we can go back and try to answer anything that you may want to go back and hear a bit more about. So Yulia?
Great. Thank you, Jim. Excellent presentation and exciting technology. Our first question is, how long does the coating take to cure?
So this coating cures very, very quickly. So we typically in our own process it's not like an epoxidized coating where you got to go through these long curing steps. This is a coating where we put it on using a rotogravure process or standard slot and die. And you coat it, it goes through the drying oven at the end of the film line and it's dried. So, and by that, I mean, all the moisture solvent is evaporated from the film. So it's, instant. It's like, traveling at 40, feet per minute or more on a drying line. There is no cure time like you would see with a 3-part or 2-part kind of epoxidized system.
Great. Thank you, Jim. There is an interesting one on antimicrobial. So I saw the press release about Kraton's antimicrobial product by Axum. Is the Nexar anti-fog antimicrobial as well?
That's a great question. So let me say up front that I can't make any claims for antimicrobial behavior until it's approved by the EPA. So until the EPA in the U.S. actually approves this as a registered pesticide, I can't make officially an antimicrobial claim. I can tell you that we filed the Biaxum product, which they just mentioned, as an antimicrobial with the EPA back in February of this year. So it's in the review process now. This technology that I'm talking about now, in theory, has the same kind of functionality as the Biaxum. And so once that Biaxum is approved, then I think that can be translated very quickly to not only being anti-fog, but being broad spectrum antimicrobial, residual antimicrobial as well. And so I can, that's, I think, the only thing I can say about that now. You can't make a claim on that until the EPA has actually approved it, though.
Thank you, Jim. Clear. The next question is about the product availability. Is it available outside of the United States?
Yeah, so this material is available to ship anywhere. So we can ship the film and or even the liquid to Europe, to Asia, I think to any region around. We may have to make sure we get any if we're shipping liquid where people actually want to coat their own film. We'll have to make sure we get the proper clearances around what paperwork is involved for specific countries, et cetera. But I mean, we've shipped it to countries in Europe. We've shipped it to countries in Asia already. Um, and so I think, I don't see any issue with putting it anywhere in the world, South America, wherever it's needed. The film grades are easy because they're an article. Um, so we can ship those immediately anywhere in the world.
That's great. And now to get back on that question, so if somebody is interested in sampling, how can they do that?
So it's really easy. So if you go to our website, you can see down here in the bottom, www.nexar-antifog.com. That website actually gives you a lot more information. It gives you videos of this stuff in action, but it also has a request site for samples. So you can request whatever samples you want on that site. It'll go into our system, and then we'll work with you to get you the necessary samples depending on what you want, whether it's film or whether it's liquid, as quickly as possible. And what we'll do if you want, a film sample, we can send you this full literature brochure, which has samples of all three film grades I just mentioned earlier in the presentation. And you can look at them, evaluate them, do your own testing, and see what you think.
Fantastic. The next question is about any companies that we are working with today. Could you stick to that, please?
Yeah, so this is literally we're talking here for the first time to a broad audience. I mean, this is something that we're literally just commercializing as we speak. So it's brand new in the market. We're actually actively seeking partners that can help us, take what we believe is a gold standard technology out to the market. And so there is no, I mean, there are people that, have started talking to us, but there's no exclusivity, no commitments anywhere in the world right now. This is pretty much wide open technology for the right partners that can help us actually take it to market and do something beneficial with it.
That's great. Looks like one last question is on price. What is the price for different product options? You talked about coatings and then films.
Yeah, so with respect to price, that is going to vary depending on one, the product grade that you're looking for on the film grades and or even on the liquid coating grades, on volumes and on a number of things. What I can share, and that's really going to be kind of a one-on-one discussion, depending on what product you want and what kind of volumes you're talking about. What I can tell you is, we bought, as you can see from the test data, we bought lots of products on the market that are currently being used in this space from all the major leading brands that we could find. And we know what we had to pay for those products, and we backed that down the value chain to get what we think is the actual price that they have involved in anti-fog film. And so that window of existing pricing out there in this protective healthcare eyewear market, we think we know that price range, and we're dead on competitive with that. So even though we're 10 times better than most of those solutions from a technology standpoint, from a pricing standpoint, we believe we're right in the heart of where the current technology is actually pricing at for the anti-fog film.
Great. There is a question on the, does Creighton have the patent for this technology?
Yes, we have patents on composition of matter around that pentablock polymer I was showing you earlier, and we have many different application patents that cover not only this application around anti-fog, but various antimicrobial patents as well. The patent portfolio for this particular technology is huge. I don't remember the exact number right off the top of my head, but it's probably way above 20 some patents in the portfolio for this technology.
Great. Wonderful. Okay, it looks like we've addressed all the questions, Jim. Thank you again for the presentation. Thank you everybody for joining. I'll put in the chat the contact information to contact Jim if you have any questions, and you have the website as well. You have a good day, and with that, we'll conclude our webinar. Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone, and thanks again.